Zero Hour. I am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. As we stare at an ever escalating wave of cases for COVID, long predicted winter surge in the spread of the disease, we are seeing more and more fault lines, you might say, in the social fabric of our society and how they are serving us poorly, especially in times like this. My next guest has written an excellent column on the topic of sick leave. If you don't know his work or read his work, you should on a regular basis. Michael Hiltzik, and for those of you who would like to find him, Hiltzik. Michael Hiltzik is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He is a columnist for the Los Angeles Times. He is also an author whose latest book, which I will soon be reading, is entitled Iron Empires, Robber Barons, Railroads, and the Making of Modern America. He joins us now. So first of all, Michael Hiltzik, thanks for coming back on the program.
It's my pleasure, RJ, anytime.
Well, we always look forward to it. And, I think your piece on sick leave is, how shall we put it, very direct, it's very clear. You write, for example, if you're looking for an area in which the United States is a global standout, here it is: paid sick leave, unfortunately, not in a good way. Really not in a good way, actually. So tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, sure. Well, the United States, as I think is the case in many workplace benefits and workplace protections, is far behind the rest of the developed world in the benefits that it offers to its workers. The statistics that are at the center of my column come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They say that about a quarter of all American workers have no right to sick leave at all, although more than 90% of state and local government workers are eligible for paid sick leave. And I think that's in part because they're heavily unionized. Only 73% of the privately employed get it. And in the private sector, moreover, paid sick leave is a privilege that really goes to professionals and managers and the better paid. Service workers, these are the people who are on the front lines of the COVID pandemic and are middle class or really working class. Only about fewer than 60% of them are eligible for sick leave. And in the lowest 25% of the income range, that's we're talking about, the real minimum wage workers, the counter people at your fast food stores, the ones who really are on the front lines. It's only about half of those have any right to sick leave. Only 3 in 10 of those in the lowest 10% of wage earners. And even so, the amount of sick leave that they're entitled to is very, very low. It's a couple of days. Maybe they get to accumulate a couple of days for every month or two that they're working. This is just nothing like what European and Asian workers in Europe and the developed Asian countries are entitled to.
And of course, Michael Hiltzik, a lot of people in this economy, including frontline workers, are part of the gig economy, where I think it's almost universally true they accumulate none at all. Isn't that right?
Well, that's true. If you're a gig economy worker, if you are a worker for Uber or Lyft, a driver for Uber or Lyft, you have no access to sick leave. And of course, this is a public health crisis for all of us, because without sick leave, without the right to time off and the right to stay home when they're sick, they're in a position to infect everybody else. They can get infected from passengers, and then they can pass their infection to other passengers who bring it home. It makes no sense whatsoever.
And just to be clear, when we say, and you have the statistics in here of just how much of an exception we are, it's quite startling as a nation, particularly since we're one of the wealthiest nations on that list. And just to be clear, these other countries do not have these benefits because of the benevolence of corporate CEOs, right? I mean, this is because these are political choices, policy choices that most other countries in what's considered the developing world and beyond have made, and we have not. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, these are government mandated benefits, and they're mandated by government in part because intelligent political leaders know that these are good for everyone, not just for um, the immediate workers. And you know, we have. It's not that this is a mystery to us. Back in 2009, when there was the H1N1 flu epidemic, um, about 26 million Americans were infected that year through just in the flu season, September to November. But 8 million of them, that's really almost a third of them, continued to go to work. And by the following February, the statistics showed, and public health authorities figured that those carriers, the 8 million who went to work, infected 7 million coworkers. Um, they call it presenteeism. That is attending work when you're ill among private sector employees. That extended the duration of the flu outbreak. It sickened millions of Americans and may have killed not a few. So, you know, we could have learned from that, but we don't learn, you know, when employee rights and public health issues come up against the rights of employers, we know which side loses, and there's no way to, you know, if that didn't get the message across to political leaders, it's hard to see what will. I mean, they don't seem to be responding to the pandemic crisis right now, so
Yes,
it's
and
beginning to look hopeless.
and Michael Hiltzik, presenteeism, you know, sort of neologism, right? An invented word, play on absenteeism, where people show up and work. I'm sure it varies business to business. Can't be great for productivity if instead of one employee out because they're sick, you have four employees, you know, half dead because they're sick, dragging, trying to do their jobs. But, you know, the argument we always hear, you write about business, you write about economics, the argument we always hear is, well, you know, businesses really can't afford to provide these. So, you know, workers, you guys are just out of luck because, you know, the money isn't there. I've certainly heard that argument a lot. Sure, you have too.
Well, I think what we see is that basically a lot of employers have gotten addicted to seeing their employees as interchangeable, not as humans, and really not as long-term workers. They don't have a long-term commitment to them. They figure if an employee needs to stay home or can't come to work, then there's somebody else willing to take that job, especially working class, low income jobs. We've given up on the idea that there's a compact between the employers and employees in this country, and this is the harvest. When you look at other countries, China, workers are guaranteed 60% to 100% of their salary for up to 6 months, and 40 to 60% for up to 6 years after that. That in this country, that would be seen as insanely generous. But of course, China isn't really suffering economically from having these very generous workplace benefits because they pay off.
Well, of course, but here's what I wonder about, and I'd love your thoughts on this, Michael Hiltzik. Here now we're approaching, if we haven't already reached, 250,000 deaths from COVID, and certainly we have to believe that our lack of access to sick leave for American workers has contributed, a lot of deaths. I won't try to guess a percentage, but there is a death toll from it, I would assume. And yet, you'd think in a logical society, and maybe I'm answering my own question there, you'd think that people might view this as a relatively abstract political conversation if they've got their own sick leave and, yeah, it's another government policy issue. But when there's a body count associated, you'd think that would escalate and focus people's attention. And yet I see none of that, very little of it, I should say, when it comes to sick leave. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, it's not abstract to more and more people. When Americans try to contemplate, well, where did I get sick? Where did I catch this? The answer tends to be, certainly for many of them, it's in family gatherings. But, when you drill down through a family gathering, somebody caught it on the outside, and they caught it in the store, or they caught it at a restaurant, or they caught it online at a bank, or what have you. And the reason that happens is because workers on those front lines cannot afford to stay home. They're certainly not guaranteed that a job will be waiting for them when they get when they get well. And once again, to contrast this with other countries, in Britain, workers are entitled to sick pay of at least $120 a week for up to 7 months at their employer's expense. In France, the government and employers together cover 90% of a worker's pay for up to 30 days of sick leave, and 2/3 after that. And if we had policies like that in this country, I think the pandemic in this country might not have been under control, because we have other factors contributing to this relentless contagion, all of it, most of it, coming out of the White House. But we would have had a much more moderate run up, because sick people would have been able to stay home until they are well, and family members would have been able to quarantine themselves without having to go to work. It would have been, I think, a materially different situation. And as families get together for Thanksgiving next week, and by the way, I've advocated in print that we put off this Thanksgiving this year until the end of April. But families are going to foregather. Family members who caught the virus on the outside and maybe aren't yet symptomatic are going to pass it on. We're going to have an explosion of cases between now and Christmas. And when you really drill down to what causes it, it's that we haven't really provided the resources for working people to stay home when they are sick, or to stay home when a family member needs care or is sick, when they have to quarantine, what have you. The dereliction of duty in Washington is unbelievable at this point.
It's genuinely appalling. And so recommendation number one from Michael Hiltzik, give that turkey a stay of execution. You mentioned 181 countries provide paid leave in some form, 11 do not, including the US, places us in an elite or inverse of elite group that includes Tonga, Tuvalu, and Nauru, as well as Somalia. And I guess I would add perhaps some of the fictional countries from Mission Impossible episodes too. But we are definitely scraping along the bottom here. And, Michael, as I look to the future and to addressing this problem, I only see two potential paths forward to address this urgent issue. One is to make it as highly visible as many of us have worked to do with Social Security expansion, and so on, to change the political dynamic around sick leave. And I think, as you point out, more people are talking about it. We're moving in that direction. And the second you alluded to earlier, which is an even heavier lift, much heavier, which is strengthening or rebuilding organized labor in this country. But those are the two responses I can see, as vague as those are. In closing, do you have any thoughts about how to move forward on this issue?
Well, the other proposal that I would make is that the U.S., through congressional action, and I guess we can say we're 2/3 of the way there. We're gonna, there's going to be a Democrat in the White House, and the Democrats are still in control of the House, and maybe though I shouldn't jinx it by saying this. Maybe they'll swing the Senate, but we need a federal mandate like as exists in these other countries that require sick leave, and I'm not talking about a couple of days, for every 6 months you work, a substantial sick leave. When there, especially when there's a pandemic. I mean, there was nothing keeping Congress from mandating more sick leave. I mean, the first and second pandemic relief bills had some provisions for sick leave, but we need something that says when there's a declared public health emergency, employers are going to have to step up to the plate and pay for up to 3 to 6 months of paid sick leave. And a lot of these companies that say, well, we offer sick leave to our workers, what they offer is unpaid sick leave.
Right.
And that doesn't really solve the problem, because it still leaves not merely an incentive, but a necessity that these workers report to work. And that's, as I said, a public health crisis for all of us. So we need a mandate. We need to make sure that it's funded. And if necessary, the government should fund it, and if possible, employers should fund at least part of it, because it really is good for everybody. But we need a mandate, because even in the states where there are mandates, including California, the mandate is really, really skimpy. I mean, it basically requires a few days a year. In some states, it requires that they be allowed to be rolled over, but that's still not very much.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But for those of you who want to hear Michael's full perspective on this, the column is headlined, "America's Pathetic Sick Leave Policies Are Killing Our Coronavirus Response." Michael Hiltzik, thanks for your great work as always. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and you're listening to The Zero Hour.